The scent of freshly turned soil drifted through the open window as Jackson Reed tightened his grip on the worn steering wheel of his ancient pickup. The highway stretched endlessly forward, guiding him and his daughter toward another uncertain destination. A father with empty pockets and fading hope, searching for work, searching for solid ground beneath his weary feet. But destiny had other designs. Just miles ahead, abandoned in the middle of a vast golden meadow, stood a rusted, broken-down harvester. Beside it waited a woman whose piercing eyes concealed more secrets than her composed demeanor suggested. Jackson couldn't have known that stopping to offer assistance would transform everything. That the woman before him, Elena Thornfield, wasn't merely a struggling farmer, but the proprietor of thousands of acres of prime agricultural land, and the final barrier against a corporate titan determined to devour her heritage. One simple act of kindness would trigger a sequence of events neither could have anticipated. Could an unexpected alliance become the salvation of a farm? Could a man who'd spent his existence repairing damaged objects discover a place where he truly belonged? There's only one way to find out. Before we delve into this unforgettable tale, please subscribe if you enjoy stories of perseverance, heartwarming romance, and the remarkable power of compassion. This is a journey of faith, love, and new beginnings against the breathtaking backdrop of America's countryside. Now let's begin. The sun hung low in the expansive sky, painting the endless fields in fiery amber hues that stretched toward the horizon. It was the kind of autumn evening that transformed the American heartland into a canvas of vibrant colors, a quiet majesty that could captivate any wandering spirit with the luxury to appreciate it. Jackson Reed had no such luxury. His weathered pickup rumbled down the dusty county road, tires stirring clouds of earth as he focused on the path ahead. His hands, roughened from years of labor, gripped the wheel with a tension that had become instinctive. The map spread across the passenger seat was marked with circles, locations he'd tried, doors that had already slammed shut. Finding employment wasn't simple when your only possessions were some tools, a stack of overdue bills, and an 8-year-old daughter sleeping in the back seat. Emma, Jackson glanced in the rearview mirror, his expression softening at the sight of his little girl curled beneath his old flannel jacket, her dark curls spilling across the seat. She had been so brave through everything, never complaining, always believing he would make things right. He had to. A loud clank disrupted his thoughts. Ahead on the roadside, a massive red harvester sat askew, steam billowing from under its hood. A woman stood beside it, arms crossed, staring at the machine with a mixture of exasperation and resolve. Jackson didn't hesitate. He pulled over, his truck protesting with a groan. The woman turned as he stepped out, brushing a strand of chestnut hair from her face. She was striking, with a presence that was both commanding and exhausted. Her denim jeans and work boots were covered in dust, and the sleeves of her plaid shirt were rolled up, revealing sun-bronzed forearms. She appeared as connected to this land as the earth and sky themselves. "Need some help?" Jackson called, adjusting his cap. The woman exhaled, clearly weighing her options. "Unless you've got a miracle tucked in your pocket." Jackson smiled slightly. "I can take a look." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Be my guest. I'm Elena." He wiped his palms on his jeans and opened the hood, immediately identifying the issue. The radiator hose had detached, and coolant was everywhere. Not catastrophic, but serious enough that the harvester wasn't going anywhere under its own power. "Is this your property?" Jackson asked, glancing around. Elena nodded, her gaze following his. "Thornfield Acres. My family's farm." Only then did Jackson truly absorb his surroundings. The sheer magnitude of it, rolling fields stretched in every direction, golden crops swaying in the gentle breeze. This wasn't just some small family operation. This was an empire of land, the kind that required generations to build. He whistled softly. "Impressive place." Elena gave a brief, almost self-conscious laugh. "Yeah, I suppose it is." Jackson didn't pry. Instead, he concentrated on the task, Elena watching as he worked with quiet efficiency, his hands steady, his concentration unwavering. There was something about him, something reliable, genuine. She had spent her life surrounded by men who either wanted to seize control of her land or dazzle her with their wealth. This man seemed different. "You're good at this," she remarked. Jackson shrugged. "Spent my life fixing things that were broken." Something in his tone made Elena pause, but she didn't probe. Within minutes, he had secured the hose and tightened the clamps. "Should hold until you can get a proper replacement," he said, wiping his hands. Elena sighed with relief. "You just saved me a 2-hour trek back to the house. Thanks." "No problem." Jackson glanced toward his truck where Emma was now sitting up, rubbing her eyes. "We were just passing through." Elena followed his gaze. "Your daughter?" He nodded. "Emma." Elena studied him. He didn't merely look tired. He looked depleted, like someone who had shouldered too much for too long. "Looking for work?" she asked. Jackson blinked. "What?" She gestured to the harvester. "I could use someone who knows how to fix things. My farm hands are great, but machinery is a different beast. I need someone who can keep it operational." Jackson hesitated. He had spent so long chasing temporary jobs, moving from town to town, never settling. This was different. This offered stability, but stability came with risk. Emma's voice cut through his doubts. "Daddy, are we staying here?" He looked down at her hopeful expression, and for the first time in ages, he couldn't bring himself to say no. Elena extended her hand. "What do you say?" Jackson met her gaze, then clasped her hand firmly. "I say, let's see where this leads." The dawn light broke over the undulating fields of Thornfield Acres, casting long golden shadows across the land. It was a crisp, late autumn morning, the kind that made the air sharp and clean, filled with the aroma of damp soil and harvested crops. For Jackson Reed, it was an unfamiliar view. Standing on the porch of the farmhouse, he took a slow sip of the coffee Elena had handed him, his eyes sweeping across the vast landscape. It had been years since he'd last stood in a place so open, so untamed. The cities he drifted through had always felt claustrophobic, too full of noise and concrete. This was different. A creak of wood behind him made him turn. Emma stood in the doorway, wrapped in his flannel shirt, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Daddy, are we really staying here?" she mumbled. Jackson crouched to her level, brushing a wayward curl from her cheek. "For now, sweetheart. Let's see how things go, okay?" Emma nodded, accepting his answer with the trust she always showed. That trust made his chest tighten. He had disappointed her before. He didn't want to do it again. Elena stepped outside, tucking her hands into the pockets of her work jeans. "You're up early," Jackson smirked. "Force of habit." "Good," she nodded toward the barn. "Mason will be expecting you in 10 minutes. He'll show you the ropes." Jackson followed her gaze. In the distance, an older man with a weathered face and a stance as solid as an ancient tree was unloading supplies from a truck. Mason Holloway. Jackson had met him briefly the night before. A man of few words but a keen observer, he had sized Jackson up with one penetrating glance and given a single nod. Approval? Skepticism? Jackson wasn't certain, but he'd earned his place in tougher circles before. The barn buzzed with activity when Jackson arrived. The aroma of hay mingled with engine oil, and the distant sounds of livestock echoed through the rafters. Mason didn't look up from where he was tightening a bolt on a rusted plow. "Glad you didn't run off," the older man remarked. Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Not yet, anyway." Mason grunted in amusement, handing Jackson a wrench. "Let's see if you actually know your way around machinery, city boy." Jackson knelt beside the plow, examining the worn-down mechanism. Years of rust and neglect had made it sluggish, but the core structure remained sound. He adjusted the wrench, tightening a bolt with practiced ease. "Not bad," Mason muttered. "What else do you see?" Jackson ran a hand along the axle, feeling the uneven wear. "Your front wheels are misaligned. Too much weight shifting to one side. If it continues, it'll snap within a few months." Mason nodded, impressed. "And the engine?" Jackson stood, wiping his hands. Needs new fuel filters. You're pushing it too hard. A slow smile tugged at the corners of Mason's mouth. All right, you're not useless, Jackson chuckled. High praise. Mason clapped him on the shoulder. Come on then, I'll show you where we keep the real disasters. The day passed in a blur of work, fixing a broken water pump, welding a cracked trailer hitch, rewiring an old generator. Jackson lost himself in the rhythm of it, the satisfaction of repairing something tangible. It was a rare feeling to create instead of just surviving. By midday, the sun was hot, and the air smelled of wheat and gasoline. As Jackson wiped sweat from his brow, Elena approached, carrying a metal lunchbox in one hand and a curious expression on her face. You haven't stopped all morning, she remarked. Jackson took the lunchbox with a nod of thanks. Keeps me busy. Elena leaned against the fence, watching him. You're good at this, Jackson shrugged. Been fixing things my whole life. Elena hesitated, as if weighing her next words. Where were you before this? Jackson exhaled slowly. He could give her the short version. Detroit, a failing auto shop, the slow disintegration of everything he had built. But some stories were easier left untold. On the road, he said simply. Elena didn't press, just nodded. Well, the work's here if you want it. Something in her tone made him pause. It wasn't just an offer of employment. It was something more, a quiet acknowledgement that he wasn't just another worker passing through. For the first time in a long time, Jackson felt the possibility of staying. That evening, as the sky transformed into shades of lavender and gold, Jackson sat on the porch watching Emma chase fireflies in the tall grass. Her laughter echoed across the land, light and free in a way he hadn't heard in years. Elena stepped outside, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. She passed him one, then leaned against the porch railing. Your daughter seems happy here, she said. Jackson nodded. She likes open spaces. She's never had much of that before. Elena took a slow sip of coffee. You could stay. Jackson turned to her. Is that an invitation? Elena held his gaze, her expression unreadable. It's an option. He let the words settle between them. For the first time in years, Jackson wasn't running. He wasn't packing up to leave before sunrise. For the first time in years, he was considering staying. The morning mist clung to the fields as Jackson rolled up his sleeves, stepping out onto the damp soil of Thornfield Acres. The scent of fresh earth and morning dew mixed with the faint trace of gasoline lingering on his hands. It had been only a few days since he'd agreed to stay, but already the farm had a way of settling into his bones. Mason was waiting for him near the machinery shed, arms crossed, his gaze as sharp as ever. Hope you're not sore from yesterday, the older man remarked. Jackson smirked. I've worked through worse. Mason handed him a wrench. Good, because today we've got real work to do. He led Jackson toward the eastern fields, where an old irrigation system had been malfunctioning for weeks. Water pooled unevenly in the furrows, drowning some crops while leaving others parched. Elena had mentioned it in passing the night before, her frustration barely hidden behind the composed exterior she wore so well. They arrived at the rusted water pump, its gears groaning in protest. Mason knelt down, muttering under his breath. Damn thing's been acting up for years. Last guy who worked on it barely kept it running. Jackson studied the machine, running his fingers over the corroded pipes. It's not just the pump, he said. The whole system's out of balance. The pressure's wrong, and it's wearing everything down. Mason raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? Jackson gave him a look. You want it fixed, or you want to keep applying bandages? The older man let out a short chuckle. Fair enough. Let's get to work. They spent the next few hours dismantling the pump, working in comfortable silence. Mason, despite his gruff exterior, had a sharp mind. He knew the land the way Jackson knew engines, by instinct, by years of trial and error. At one point, Mason leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. So you're really planning on sticking around? Jackson tightened a bolt. Seems that way. Mason nodded, as if testing the words. Elena's tough, but she's been carrying this place on her shoulders for too long. Jackson didn't look up. She doesn't strike me as someone who needs rescuing, Mason smirked. No, but even the strongest shoulders have limits. As the afternoon stretched on, Jackson returned to the farmhouse, his muscles aching but his mind clear. He was beginning to understand the rhythm of the land, the endless demands, the quiet victories of a well-run farm. Elena was standing by the wooden fence, watching a group of farm hands loading hay onto a trailer. Her posture was relaxed, but Jackson could see the calculated awareness in her gaze. A woman who had learned to always remain in control. He leaned against the fence beside her. Water systems patched up. Should hold until we can replace the pipes. Elena turned to him, surprised. That was fast. Jackson shrugged. Not my first time fixing something held together by rust and prayer. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I appreciate it. They stood in silence for a moment, the golden light of late afternoon casting long shadows across the fields. Then Elena spoke, her voice quieter. My father used to say a farm is only as strong as the people who keep it running. Jackson glanced at her. Sounds like he was a wise man. Elena's expression darkened, just for a second. He was, but he was also stubborn, always thought he had to do everything himself. Jackson studied her profile, the sharp angles softened by the sunlight, the way her fingers absently tapped against the fence post. Sounds familiar, he murmured. Elena turned to him, eyes narrowing slightly, but there was no real irritation, just the unspoken understanding between two people who recognized a similar fire in each other. Before she could respond, a voice called from the distance. Miss Thornfield. They turned to see Harrison Wells, dressed in his typical immaculate suit, despite the dust swirling in the air. His presence was like an intrusion, out of place among the raw authenticity of the farm. Jackson felt the shift in Elena immediately, her shoulders squared, her expression smoothing into something unreadable. Harrison stopped a few feet away, offering a rehearsed smile. I was hoping to catch you before you got too busy. Elena's voice was polite but cool. What do you want, Harrison? Harrison gestured toward the fields. I heard you've been dealing with equipment failures. A farm this size needs modern infrastructure, Elena. You know my offer still stands. Jackson's jaw tightened. So this was the guy trying to buy her out. Elena's fingers clenched against the fence. I told you the farm's not for sale. Harrison sighed as if she were being unreasonable. Come on, Elena. You can't keep fighting this battle alone. Let me help. Jackson watched the exchange carefully. There was something in Harrison's tone, not concern, but condescension. Elena held her ground. I don't need your help, and I don't appreciate you showing up unannounced. Harrison's jaw twitched, but he kept his smile in place. His gaze flicked to Jackson, assessing. And who's this? Jackson stepped forward slightly, his presence solid. Jackson Reed. Harrison's lips curled in a smirk. Ah, the mechanic. How quaint. Jackson didn't take the bait. He'd met men like Harrison before, the kind who thought money made them superior. Elena crossed her arms. We're done here, Harrison. Harrison exhaled through his nose, clearly annoyed. Fine, but don't forget you have options. With that, he turned and walked back toward his car, the tires kicking up dust as he pulled away. As soon as he was gone, Jackson let out a low whistle. That guy always this charming? Elena sighed, running a hand through her hair. Harrison's been trying to buy up farmland all over the county. He thinks he's the future of agriculture. Jackson frowned. And you don't? Elena shook her head. I think the future should be built by people who actually care about the land. Jackson considered that. He had spent years drifting, fixing things that weren't his, never leaving a mark. But here, in this place, he was beginning to understand something. Maybe Elena wasn't just holding on to this land out of pride. Maybe it was something deeper, a fight for something worth preserving. And for the first time, Jackson wondered if maybe, just maybe, it was a fight he could be part of. The sky over Thornfield Acres stretched wide and endless, painted in soft hues of pink and gold as the sun dipped toward the horizon. The air was heavy with the scent of earth, hay, and the lingering memory of a long day's work. Jackson Reed stood near the barn, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. The farm had a way of settling into his muscles, its rhythm becoming his own. He hadn't planned on staying, hadn't planned on belonging anywhere again, but the days had begun to string together like an old melody, one he hadn't realized he missed. Emma was sitting on a hay bale a few feet away, swinging her legs as she watched the farm hands finishing up for the evening. Elena stood near the fence, speaking in hushed tones with Mason. From the stiffness of her posture, Jackson could tell something was wrong. He wasn't one to intrude, but something about Elena's shoulders, the way they carried too much weight, too much unspoken burden, made him walk over. Mason caught sight of him first and nodded. Figured you'd be interested in this. Elena exhaled, rubbing her temple before turning to Jackson. Harrison's not just making offers anymore. He's making moves. Jackson frowned. What kind of moves? Elena handed him a stack of official-looking documents. He scanned the pages quickly, his sharp eyes catching words like land assessment, water rights, and government buyout incentives. This is bad, Jackson muttered. Mason grunted. No kidding. Elena crossed her arms. Harrison's been buying up small farms on the outskirts, consolidating them under his agribusiness model. He's lobbying for zoning changes that could make it impossible for independent farmers to compete. Jackson narrowed his eyes. And Thornfield Acres. Elena's jaw tightened. We're the last holdout. If we go under, so does everyone else in this county who's still fighting to keep their land. Jackson let out a slow breath, his mind already working through the implications. So that's why he was so damn smug. Mason folded his arms. Harrison thinks he can wait her out. He's banking on Elena getting tired, making a mistake, or running out of options. Jackson shook his head. Does he even know who he's up against? A ghost of a smile flickered across Elena's lips. He's about to find out. Later that evening, as the farm quieted under the weight of twilight, Jackson found Elena in the barn, brushing down one of the horses. The rhythmic motion of her hands against the animal's coat seemed to steady her, grounding her in the one thing that remained constant. This land, this farm, this fight. Jackson leaned against the stall, watching her for a moment before speaking. So what's the plan? Elena didn't look up. You assume I have one, Jackson smirked. I assume you're not the type to just roll over. She let out a soft chuckle. No, I'm not. She set the brush down and turned to face him, her gaze sharp but not unkind. The land is my leverage. Harrison might have money and influence, but he doesn't have the one thing he wants most, control of Thornfield Acres. Jackson crossed his arms. And how do we make sure he never gets it? Elena hesitated. I have an idea, but it's risky. Jackson arched an eyebrow. Let's hear it. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Harrison's whole plan hinges on public perception. He's banking on the idea that small farms are dying, that industrialized agriculture is the only way forward. But if we prove him wrong, if we make Thornfield Acres thrive in a way that can't be ignored, we might be able to turn the tide. Jackson tilted his head. And how do we do that? Elena's eyes gleamed with quiet determination. By rebuilding, expanding, showing the entire damn state that a family-run farm isn't a relic of the past. It's the future. Jackson whistled. That's ambitious. Elena's lips curved into a smirk. Scared? Jackson chuckled. Of a challenge? Never. There was a beat of silence between them, something unspoken hanging in the air. Elena glanced down, as if realizing how close they were standing. She took a small step back, clearing her throat. We'll start tomorrow. Mason and I will go over the numbers, figure out what resources we can pull together. In the meantime, I need you to do something for me. Jackson met her gaze. Name it. Elena hesitated, then finally said, Fix the old harvester. Jackson blinked. The one in the shed? The things barely held together with rust and luck. Elena gave a small, knowing smile. Exactly. If you can bring it back to life, maybe there's hope for the rest of us. Jackson shook his head, but there was something else in his expression now. A quiet determination, a challenge he was willing to accept. All right, Thornfield, let's see if we can make a miracle happen. That night, as Jackson lay awake in the small guest cabin Elena had offered him and Emma, he found himself staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. Emma was asleep in the next room, her soft breathing the only sound in the quiet farmhouse. Jackson exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He had spent years drifting, running, fixing things that were never his to keep. But here, for the first time in a long time, he wanted to stay. Not just for the work, not just for the fight, but for something deeper. For a woman who carried the weight of an entire farm on her shoulders, but still found the strength to fight. For a little girl who deserved a home that didn't feel temporary. For himself, because maybe, just maybe, this was a place worth fixing. The early morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp soil and freshly cut hay. Jackson Reed stood in front of the old harvester, arms crossed, surveying the rusted beast with a mixture of amusement and challenge. The thing was ancient, its faded red paint peeling away, exposing the worn metal beneath. It looked as if it had seen better days long before he was even born. He glanced toward the barn, where Elena was speaking with Mason about the upcoming harvest. Her posture was tense, the weight of Harrison's looming threat pressing heavily on her shoulders. She needed a win, and if fixing this damn harvester gave her even a small one, then that was exactly what he was going to do. Jackson grabbed his toolbox and got to work. The harvester's engine was a mess. Corroded wires, clogged fuel lines, an oil leak that had gone unchecked for years. He muttered under his breath. This thing's not just broken, it's a crime scene. Mason, who had wandered over to watch, let out a dry chuckle. Should have junked it years ago. Jackson wiped his hands on his jeans, shaking his head. She wouldn't let go of it, would she? Mason leaned against the barn wall, arms crossed. Nope, it was her father's. Jackson exhaled slowly. That explained a lot. Elena wasn't just fighting to keep the farm, she was fighting to hold on to the past. He turned back to the harvester, rolling up his sleeves. Well then, guess I better not let her down. As Jackson worked, the farm hummed with life around him. Emma sat nearby on an overturned bucket, watching him with fascination, occasionally handing him a wrench when he needed it. You really think you can fix it, Daddy? She asked, her small fingers tracing patterns in the dust on the harvester's side. Jackson smiled, tapping the wrench against his palm. I think we won't know unless we try. Emma beamed. Then you can fix anything. His chest tightened at her words. If only life were that simple. Later in the afternoon, as Jackson wiped grease from his hands, Elena approached, arms crossed. You're really putting all this effort into something that might not even run, she asked, tilting her head. Jackson smirked. You kept it all these years hoping it would. She hesitated, then looked away. It was my father's pride and joy. He used to say a farm is only as strong as the hands that keep it running. Jackson nodded toward the harvester. Then let's make sure those hands didn't work for nothing. Elena studied him for a long moment before sighing, her tough exterior cracking just a little. I just don't want to hope for something that won't happen. Jackson met her gaze, his voice steady. Maybe it's not about hoping. Maybe it's about making it happen. Elena blinked as if she wasn't used to people believing in things the way he did. Then with a small, almost reluctant smile, she nodded. All right, mechanic. Let's see what you got. As the sky darkened, Jackson kept working. His fingers were numb from the cold, his muscles sore. But he was close. Mason had long since retired for the night. Even Emma had curled up in the barn loft, dozing off under a blanket. Elena, however, hadn't left. She stood nearby, hands in her jacket pockets, watching as he tested the fuel pump again. Nothing. Jackson muttered a curse under his breath, slamming the hood shut. Elena exhaled. Jackson, it's late. Maybe, but before she could finish, he turned the key again. A loud cough, a sputter, a pause, then a deep rumbling growl. The harvester came to life. Elena's eyes widened, her lips parting slightly as if she couldn't believe it. Jackson grinned. Told you. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Elena let out a breathless laugh, a sound so rare, so unexpected, that it made Jackson's chest tighten. She stepped forward, running a hand over the harvester's side as if afraid it would disappear. I can't believe you did it. Jackson wiped his hands on a rag, smirking. Never doubted it for a second. She turned to him, eyes shining in the dim light. There was something unspoken between them, something fragile but real, a kind of understanding, a kind of trust. Thank you, she said softly. And for the first time since arriving at Thornfield Acres, Jackson realized he wasn't just fixing machines anymore. He was fixing something much bigger. The morning after the harvester roared back to life, Thornfield Acres felt different. It wasn't just the machine running again. It was something deeper, something unspoken that hummed beneath the surface. Elena Thornfield had spent years carrying this farm alone, fighting off people like Harrison Wells, battling droughts, balancing books that never quite seemed to settle. She'd always relied on herself, because in the end, that was the only certainty she knew. But now, as she walked past the barn where Jackson was working, tools in hand, she didn't feel quite so alone anymore. Mason whistled as he ran a hand along the harvester's freshly oiled frame. Damn thing looks almost brand new. Jackson smirked, wiping grease from his hands. Give it a few months of work, and it'll look old again. Elena stood beside them, her arms crossed, but there was no mistaking the glint of satisfaction in her eyes. I have to admit, she said, I didn't think you could pull it off. Jackson raised an eyebrow. That makes two of us. Mason chuckled, shaking his head as he walked off. You two keep this up, and people might start thinking you actually get along. Elena rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Jackson leaned against the harvester, looking at her. You going to tell me why this thing mattered so much? She hesitated for just a second, then ran a hand over the hood. It was my father's. He bought it when I was a kid. We used to ride on it together during harvest season, back when things were simpler. Jackson didn't say anything for a moment, just nodded. Guess it's good as new then. Elena met his gaze, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. Yeah, it is. Then she glanced at the sky. The storm clouds were rolling in, dark and heavy on the horizon. And just like that, reality returned. By noon, the wind had picked up, whistling through the fields with an urgency that made even the most seasoned farmhands exchange wary glances. Jackson had seen storms before, brutal, merciless ones that tore through land like a beast with no master. He could feel it in the air now, the way everything seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Elena stood on the farmhouse porch, hands on her hips as she surveyed the approaching front. We need to move fast, she said, voice sharp and focused. The wheat's ready for harvest. If we don't get as much in as we can before the storm hits, we could lose half of it. Mason nodded. I'll get the crew started. Jackson took a step forward. What do you need me to do? Elena didn't hesitate. Take the harvester. The ground's already damp, so we can't afford to waste time. Get out there and help bring the last of the wheat in. He nodded. Got it. As the crew scrambled into action, Emma came running out of the house, her eyes wide. Daddy, is it going to be bad? Jackson crouched, resting a hand on her shoulder. It'll be all right, sweetheart. We're just getting ready, just in case. Emma chewed her lip, then glanced at Elena. Can I help? Elena studied the little girl for a moment, then surprised them both by saying, Yeah, we could use an extra pair of hands in the barn. Emma beamed, and Jackson felt something in his chest tighten. Elena wasn't just letting him in, she was letting his daughter in too. The wind howled as Jackson gripped the harvester's steering wheel, guiding it through the fields. The freshly repaired engine rumbled beneath him, holding steady despite the uneven, rain-soaked earth. Farm hands worked in a frenzied but coordinated effort, tossing wheat into the trailers as quickly as they could. Mason drove one of the larger trucks, his face set in grim determination. Overhead, the clouds grew darker, pressing down like a weight against the sky. Elena's voice crackled through the two-way radio clipped to Jackson's belt. "How's it looking?" He pressed the button. "We're moving fast, but the wind's picking up." A pause then. "Keep going." Jackson didn't argue. He knew what was at stake. They had just finished loading the last of the wheat onto the trucks when the first drops of rain began to fall. Fat, heavy drops that smacked against the dry earth like warning shots. Then, in an instant, the sky split open. The rain came hard and fast, slamming against the ground, the wind tearing through the fields like an invisible beast. Jackson jumped down from the harvester, running toward the barn where Elena was ushering the last of the workers inside. Emma clung to Elena's hand, her hair whipping in the wind. "Go!" Elena shouted, waving him in. Jackson barely made it through the doors before Mason slammed them shut behind him. The storm raged outside, rattling the barn's wooden frame. The sound of rain pounding against the roof was deafening. Jackson turned to Elena. "Everyone accounted for?" She nodded, breathless. "Yeah, we got everything in, just in time." A collective sigh of relief went through the group, but Elena's shoulders remained tense, because this wasn't just about surviving the storm. This was about surviving everything else that was still coming. As the workers sat together, waiting out the worst of the storm, Jackson found himself leaning against a wooden beam, watching Elena as she stood near the doors. She looked exhausted, but more than that, she looked determined. He walked over. "You okay?" She let out a breath, nodding. "We made it through this one." Jackson studied her. "You ever get tired of fighting?" Elena gave a short, almost bitter laugh. "Every damn day." "Then why keep going?" She turned to him, her gaze steady. "Because if I don't, who will?" For a moment, there was only the sound of the rain and the distant roll of thunder. Jackson ran a hand through his damp hair. "You don't have to do it alone, you know."